Wanted to come live today to share with y'all about um, this wild experience that I've had. And I wanted to, I have an invitation on the other side of this story, and I want you to know the origin story of the invitation because it wasn't like my normal kind of like, oh, here is the strategy for the thing. It wasn't like that at all. I did not have this experience planned in this way. Um, I do think it was planned. I just don't think it was planned by me. And this whole, everything is an activation sequence. Everything that exists in terms of in this consensus reality exists because of an activation or manifestation, someone would say, sequence. So this activation sequence began 6 months ago on the morning I turned 50 years old. I woke up and it was like the dream that I just had was still like kind of clouds of it were still trailing in the air in my room. And I woke up hearing these words: "You can't kill a goddess. They tried, but I'm still here, and you are too." So I'm like, bet I know what to do with this. I did what I do every morning, which is open my journal, wrote those words down. Then at the top of the next page, which is a fresh page, I just wrote, "Infinite Spirit, show me the way." Like, what is it that I am supposed to be picking up here? And I began writing freely. I just let my hand move and let come out what needed to come out. And what came through me and to me in that moment was not particularly gentle. Okay. It was like, you're not dead yet. You can't prostitute yourself forever, archetypally speaking. Like right now, the window is open. The veil is thin, is actually more like what it said. Um, Cease resisting. Let me come through. Be not afraid. Just be still. And then before I could do what I would normally do, which is like litigate within my own mind what cease resisting means, I began to have a series of migraines that required me. They didn't require me to be still. Let me give myself more credit than that. I've learned that this meat covered skeleton made of stardust runs such a high amount volume of energy through it that if I resist what's trying to come through by being busy, procrastivity, trying to do other stuff, taking care of other people's crises. Um, I have shred jewelry, I have fractured bones, I have had, I clenched my teeth so hard I broke 4 of them. So I don't litigate it no more, and I don't resist it no more. I just took that moment, called it my migraine portal. I called it the stillness of illness, which has been very fruitful in my life. I let nothing be wasted on me. And then, so I had this series of migraines. My son in the United States got very sick. I was up all night on the phone with his doctors and then getting up and walking my 8-year-old to school here in Portugal. And the best way I could describe it is that my brain started to feel like an ocean liner that had sprung some leaks. Do you know this about ocean liners, that like the leaky compartments seal themselves off? And then the rest of it, the ship creates an airtight compartment. So it was like everywhere else in my brain, the band played on in the airtight compartments, but the leaky compartments just sealed themselves off and ceased functioning entirely. And then one day I was working with a client. It was one of the few clients I'd continued to work with during this time. And something she said made me think of ADHD. And I was like, I wonder if ADHD in high achieving women is like a thing. And so I Googled it. And I read an article, and then I read 7 more articles that day because I felt like these articles were putting my personal business in the street. And then within a week, I'd been diagnosed with ADHD alongside my existing, old PTSD diagnosis and an even older diagnosis I'd had since I was 2 as gifted. So that week that I was diagnosed, I went down a massive rabbit hole in the neurobiology. I have a master's degree in psychology. Have long studied neurobiology. I went down a rabbit hole in the neurobiology of the feral Ferrari is what I call the ADHD brain. And it felt like that last scene in The Sixth Sense where once Bruce Willis's character has been dead this whole time, everything changes. Your whole like narrative of what had happened changed. And so that's what happened to me. And then for the next 6 months after my birthday, I just being still. I did what the goddess told me to do in my journal. I sat in the migraine portal, sometimes all day in the dark. And I just decided to not do anything to get out of it faster. I decided that the only way I could get out, I should remember telling a friend, the only way I'm going to get out of this is to get out of this what I am here to get out of this. So I didn't build my business. I did no extra client work. I did no teaching. I did no coaching. And I did no calls unless they came to me and felt really right. I dealt with my existing clients and made them offers of ways they could continue to engage with me, and that was it. Otherwise, I just sat still and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. I let the insights, it was like whole sentences dropped fully formed into my inner pipeline, and I just let them out onto the page. And as I was sitting with this and sitting with like my Jungian trained approach to what are the sacred ancient stories that I can use to offer some symbology and illumination for what I'm supposed to get out of this experience, the story that kept coming to my mind as the closest parallel to what I was experiencing was the story of Inanna's descent, which is one of the oldest written stories in human history, the story of the Queen of Heaven and Earth who asks for requests admission, requests admission into the underworld, is required to give up her powers and her regalia to each of its 7 gates until at the bottom she's killed, hung on a meat hook to rot for 3 days, and then comes back to life, is resurrected and rises after the 3 days. So if you've heard a story that sounds like that before, know that this is where that story may have gotten some inspiration because this story was written like 3,000 years before the story of Christ. With the 3 days and the hanging on the hook and the dead body and all of that, all of it. So I thought that I could use Inanna's descent as like a metaphor for burnout, which I'd already realized was like not really just burnout. It was like the positive disintegration of my high achieving ADHD superwoman mask. Okay. And I was like, yeah, I can use Nana's descent as like a story about the midlife descents or crises of disease and divorce and debt or burnout that every single gifted woman I know goes through. And it's usually long for us. It usually starts around 40 years old and culminates around, in a window surrounding her 49th or 50th birthday, which we know to be Chiron's return in astrology. So I started to use the story of Inanna's descent to write a book about midlife descent and ascension for gifted neurocomplex women over 40. But way more importantly, I began to start having conversations with the goddess Inanna and her emanations in the form of several other pre-patriarchal prime creatress goddesses. Net from Egypt, Barbilo, whose name I have a hard time saying because in Portuguese we say O's differently. Yamanja or Yamanja, if you're Brazilian, the West African Orisha, Queen of the Sea. I began to talk with them and I began to listen to them all of the time until like almost 2 weeks ago, a week ago now, on the Taurus new moon. I was supposed to be working on my book proposal, and I was. The book is called Self-Centered, and I had done some really deep, really great work on organizing the 7 gates of the underworld by mapping them to the corresponding sort of, how do I want to say that for here? Self-silencing, or yeah, self-silencing and other internalized, patriarchal ways of being that are in ourselves, and then mapping those to the corresponding principles of self-centering women that I wanted to teach at each gate on the ascension, right? So it was like kind of a vibe. It was like actually kind of great. And then somewhere in there, I got this very strong inner nudge to go back and read the translation of Inanna's Descent that all the Jungians use, the Walkstein-Kramer translation. And, I found that Inanna's Descent was just one of several stories in their book. So You know how we do when we have this kind of a brain. I read all 261 pages in a single setting, and as I read this translation, I was like, this don't seem like Inanna." It was like if I started using AI to post a bunch of posts. Joy, Nick, everybody else in here and on my email list would be like, "This Tara didn't write this because Tara would not say this." It felt like that. It felt like I was like, the goddess. I've been talking to the goddess. She didn't. This is not her because I know she would never say this, right? So the descent story was powerful, but there were all these little hints of uh, power, of patriarchal power trips up in there. Like, first I saw that there was, like, a dowry that had been paid. Then I saw that before Inanna's descent, they told another story where she gets her father, the god of wisdom, drunk, and he gives her a bunch of powers, and then she gives that he's been hoarding, and then she gives them out to all the people, which is like, "Great. Oh, yeah, the great matriarchy gives powers to all the people." Yeah, but that means he was the source of her powers. They were like his drunken gift to her that she tricked him into giving. And I was like, "That's kind of bullshit." I call bullshit. In that story, there's even a bit where he gifts her the universal cosmic power to kiss the phallus. I was like, this is not her. Now, I already knew the history. I knew that she existed way before men started trying to possess and control property and women and children. So she existed before patriarchy was even a thing. Because back then men didn't actually know that children were theirs. They thought they just kind of came out of the women. And I knew that her story had been edited and rewritten and eroded over time until she was turned into, like, all of these little male-centered goddesses of later cultures. But as I sat there reading and communing with her, I was like, "Is this just a side quest? Do I just need to write? And, like, what is happening?" And she was like, "Please read, please read. This is not a side quest. Please keep going." And I think the lawyer mind of mine, the Bible scholar I was trained to be as a child mind of mine was like, if that's not her, go back, keep going back. I just kept kind of like interrogating and investigating and going back and realizing that this story that is like beloved in feminist psychology, the story of Inanna's descent, from the most widely accepted translation of that story was not even pre-patriarchal at all. So I kept digging and I found an older story. I found an older body of stories, lore of knowledge about Inanna that was pre-patriarchal, that hadn't been infected. That if the descent story was 2,000 years old, this new cycle of stories was 5,000 years old, and the experience of reading it for the first time was kinda like that Bruce Willis moment in the movie where I was like, "Whoa, this is, like, shifting what I thought I knew about not just Inanna, about the world, about me, about God, about you." Because these hymns listed her powers and universal source codes that she held, but just they are not credited to anybody else. Nobody gave them to her. They are just hers because she's the queen of heaven and earth. And as I was reading them, I was like, these are literally the Psalms of the canonical Bible, just like 3,000 years earlier. So I was like really so grateful in that moment for my hyper focus and rabbit holes. And one of the things that I found in my investigation was that this first series of hymns to Inanna was actually written by a woman whose place in human history can absolutely not be overstated. Cannot. So I was like reading and sweating and writing, and I rewrote the new overview for the book. And it was like in a really different frame, and the energy was way higher and more feral than before because this was no longer like a book about myths for burned out women and some cool action steps. This was now a transmission that the goddess that in part, yes, it was like my story and my teachings, but it was also like the goddess was writing this through me, about you, to you. And that reorganized a lot, not just the book, but my understanding of the world. So the last thing I needed to do before I could sign off that day was to select the A-list book club, bibliotherapy book club read for this month. And I just was like, everything seemed so surface and just, after that. Everything seemed like optimize yourself. Like, no, that's not you guys, no. I'm like, these women I am working with are the fractal goddess. I wouldn't tell the goddess to optimize yourself. Okay, so I asked the goddess, what shall I have them read? And she said, the book they need to read hasn't been written yet. It's the book we're writing. So that's the longest and most delicious way I could think to tell you that for the next few sessions of the A-List Bibliotherapy Book Club, we are not going to read someone else's book. I'm going to come online and we're going to do two-part book club sessions. I'm going to read what I've written for you. Um, as part one. And then as part two, we're going to do some deep inner work guided by me, guided through the Tara-Nicholle Kirke method. We're going to do some deep inner work to reclaim your own universal powers, to take that sacred path, stop reacting to all of this, stop letting yourself be pulled in every centrifugal force's direction. Get self-centered and tap back into your natural strengths and powers. We're going to do this on every full moon and new moon. And at the end of every one of these sessions in part two, I'm going to guide you through intention setting for what specific to whatever full moon or new moon we're in. So this is your official invitation. I got to go pick up my kid from school. You should join me for the Inanna Transmissions Book Club series. Session one is this coming Sunday, May 31st at 8:00 a.m. Pacific. Yes, it's Sunday morning. It's church, y'all. 8:00 a.m. At 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. London and Lisbon. We're going to meet right here on the A-List. If you are a free or paid subscriber, you will be able to access part one, which is the reading and the transmission for that session. Paid subscribers only will have access to part two, which is the deep inner work and the guided intention setting. Okay. And again, we're going to meet for a while. We're going to meet every 2 weeks on every full moon and every new moon. We're going to shed some things. We're going to ascend and transcend. We're going to reclaim. We're going to set intentions and we're going to give thanks for them in advance because they're already done. All right. We're going to take the veil off, take the mask off. And this particular coming Sunday is a blue moon in Sagittarius, which is the sign of truth telling, the sign of breaking it's like pattern breaking season, breaking out of what no longer fits. It's one of the nights the old folklore says that the veil between worlds goes thin. And that's the same, that's like a macro of what's happening with you in that window around your 50th birthday. So this is for women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. Every single group will get some beautiful different thing out of it. And I think the more different age groups are represented, it will be more beneficial for all of the rest of us. I will drop, let's see, there is already a post on the Substack that has the details. Just know if you are in a paid tier at all, any of the paid tiers, you'll get to come to all of it. If you are a free subscriber, you'll come to the first half. I will drop the details into the body of this post after I get back from picking up my kid. I love y'all, and I will see you next Sunday. Bring your friends. This is like a vibe. I assure you, you've never experienced anything like this. I love you. I'll see you there.